Hi, hello, I hope you're taking care of yourself. If you're new here, my name is Lexi, and I read a lot of books of staggeringly variable quality, and we talk about them. That's what we do on this channel. And today, we're gonna be talking about all of the really cool books I read in both September and October of this year. I have 11 to get through this time, 5 from September and 6 from October, and overall, bangers. I've given more 5 stars to books in this wrap-up than I have the rest of the year combined. September especially was just fire. Like, I feel like you can't really tell based on the numbers, like it's kind of still the same as it's been for the past few months, but I have been in a subtle reading slump for a few months now. I typically read like twice as many books as I have for most of this year. I mean, that sounds insane because it is. No normal person in their right mind reads that many books, and you should not compare yourself to that, but I do. It's like how I cope with day-to-day existence on this planet. And I mean, I have 11 books to talk about. Like, I'm still reading a lot because it's all I know how to do in this life, but not as much. I've just been spending a lot more time on my other hobbies, which include rotting on my couch and lingering and ruminating over things that I cannot change. But with all of that said, these past couple of months, I finally feel like I'm starting to break through that and actually feel genuine excitement rather than just kind of numb, ooh, that might be interesting about books that I haven't yet read. And God bless, honestly, because when you go that long without loving something that you are pretty sure it's like fundamental to your identity that you enjoy, you really just start to feel like you are a born and bred hater. Like, it's nice to be proven wrong every once in a while. So we are finally, dare I say, on an upwards trajectory, which I really shouldn't jinx it. Like, more things could happen. It's not the end of the year yet. But anyways, that was a lot more words than I normally say at the beginning of these videos, so my apologies for that. But if it's your first time watching my wrap-ups, I really try hard in these videos not to say anything that I would consider to be spoilers. I will tell you what the book is about based on the blurb in the first few chapters. I will give you a fairly vague but also surprisingly extensive rendition of my thoughts, feelings, and opinions, with the goal of that being, if you've read the book, you know exactly why I feel the way that I do, but if you haven't read the book, you know if it might be a good fit for you based on your personal preferences, which might be different than mine. And then you can go on to have that unvarnished experience of reading it if you so choose. Like, that's the goal. I don't want to take that away from you by spoiling things for no reason. So the first book that I read all the way back at the beginning of September, I think that I finished this on my birthday or like right around it, but this is Shark Heart, and this was a gift. It was a little treat just for me. There's just no better way to put it than that. I had no choice but to give this a strong 5 stars. It was just one of those stories that instantly reminded me why I like to read so much. I don't get a lot of those, okay? And it has taken like Herculean effort to resist talking about this book until now. Dude, this just bowled me over. Like, I felt subhuman when I finished this book in the best way. This is a book about a man who is diagnosed with this disease that will slowly transform him from man into being a great white shark. It's not exactly a terminal disease because he'll be a shark in the ocean, but it is terminal insofar as he'll no longer be human. He's not going to be a dude with like a wife and a family who care about him anymore, and he'll lose a lot of his humanity along the way. And just stay with me because I know that that premise sounds goofy, and it is goofy. It's like, would you still love me if I were a worm? But it's fleshed out into just truly harrowing shit. Like, I was a shell of a girl at multiple points when I was reading this book, because what it really is just an extended metaphor for any degenerative illness that you can think of. Anything that can slowly sap away the person that you love until they are no longer themselves. The most obvious comparison is dementia, but honestly, there are a lot of things that can impact people much younger than that still fit in. It's like a big bucket of a metaphor. And this book is about both how hard leaving can be for the person who is sick, but also about how alone you can feel as a caretaker, or just as the person who is left behind, who has to pick up the pieces after the person that they loved the most in the world is gone. It's not the kind of book that's going to explain itself to you. Like, it's kind of just a fact of life that people turn into animals sometimes, and it's really sad, and you're not going to get more lore than that. Like, you kind of just have to accept it and allow yourself to be consumed by the story. This book is also formatted in a really unique way. It's these like really short chapters that kind of bounce between verse and prose and theater sometimes, like script writing, depending on the chapter and the scene. And it's also all told in these little vignettes. Like, the chapters are so short because it's not just one narrative that you're following. You're just engaging with a selection of little moments in their lives from before and during and after the diagnosis. And all told, I think that some people might justifiably find this book to be like too arty for them, but for me, it just enhanced my experience. The way that the story is told is not something that I've seen before, and it's also a debut. So I'm starving, I'm dying of thirst, actually, just trying to find anything else right now that is similar to soothe the burn of finishing this book. But let me read you a couple of quotes to show you just why I think that this book is so magical. But also, let me just say that the best ones I'm not going to be reading to you, because for some of them, you have to be there. Like, they're too close to the heart of the story for me to spoil for you. So what I'm about to read isn't even this book's true power, okay? Just know that before I start. Lewis learns that he would grow to be over 10 feet long and weigh at least 1,000 pounds. He would be able to swim as fast as 30 miles per hour. He might also be inclined to migrate, traveling hundreds, if not thousands of miles in a single year. But what excited Lewis most was the development of his great white shark electroreception, a shark's ability to perceive the subtle electrical fields emitted by living things for the purpose of finding prey. This knowledge inspired an exciting idea. With electroreception, Lewis hoped to sense her, know her, and love her even thousands of miles away in the ocean. Nothing he read indicated that electroreception extended further than a couple yards. But maybe, he thought, maybe if I practiced, I would never really have to say goodbye. When Lewis finally came to bed, he took sleeping Wren's hand in his and closed his eyes, seeing if he could sense her electrical fields. What are you doing?" she asked groggily. "Just seeing what it's like to love you when I can't see you." The surface of love was a feeling, but beyond this thin layer, there was a fathomless, winding maze of caverns offering many places to see and explore. Wren used to think romantic passion only grew more intense in the depths. But this belief was naive and impractical, a byproduct of a certainty-obsessed culture that equates love with longing and views ambivalence as a fatal flaw. Wren saw now how passion was delicate and temporary, a visitor, a feeling that would come and go. Feelings fled under pressure. Feelings did not light the darkness. What remained strong in the deep, the hard times, was love as an effort, a doing, a conscious act of will. Soulmates, like her and Lewis, were not theoretical and found. They were tangible, built. I don't know. I could read more. It's that kind of book where just everything is really beautiful and well done, but I'm going to restrain myself. Just, if you like things that are sad, if you like love and feeling it and feeling sad sometimes because of it, because that's kind of just a part of the game, I have to say, I really recommend. But following this book, which is honestly an unfair and distressing task, but somebody had to do it, it is Legends and Lattes. This is like the quintessential social media cozy fantasy. I'm sure that I'm not the first person to mention this book to you if you're a fantasy fan, but it's kind of like an end of campaign D&D epilogue, but extended out into an entire book. That's the vibe. And it follows this orc girl who retires from her lifetime of adventuring and goes and starts a coffee shop inside of this city that has never really heard of coffee before, because coffee is a gnomish thing and nobody knows the strange ways of the gnomes inside of this faraway city. And yeah, this is her coffee shop. And the way I describe this book in my Goodreads review is it's like a restaurant management sim, like Coffee Tycoon. It's got kind of a gameplay loop that is just Viv needs to get an improvement for her cafe, so she goes and sources that improvement and then uses that improvement to run her cafe and meet some clients. But oh no, now there's a new improvement that she needs to somehow get to help improve her cafe. Oh look, a potential friend that can help her access that improvement. Better befriend them, not just to better her cafe, but also to better her emotional well-being. And like, look, I feel like Scrooge. Like, genuinely, I feel like such a bitch roasting it. But that is all that is going on inside of this book. That is all this is. It's truly just, wow, look how powerful friendship is. Aren't you glad that we're all friends working towards our simple ambitions in life all together in the same place? And I appreciate that. I think it's a sweet message. I can see why people find this book to be comforting, but it just felt kind of flat for me because there was nothing else going on. Like, it did have some kind of imaginary emotional stakes sometimes, but it's cozy fantasy to the point where you don't even kind of buy that any of it will matter or have any consequences at all for any of the characters. And then you're right. And I don't know, I think I'm too much of an angst lord sometimes. Like, I need something to sharpen my teeth to inside of books. And this doesn't even really begin to promise that. So in some ways it's my own fault. But I also feel like you can be cozy and have relatively low stakes and still also be meaningful at the same time. Like, I'm not above crying to a Christmas movie. And for me, this just ended up feeling kind of shallow. I still gave it 3 stars because I don't think it was bad. 3 stars is my, like, this was fine and mildly enjoyable rating. And I can see why people like it, why people find it to be kind of mindlessly tender and fun. Like, they really are friends, and that can be nice sometimes when you feel alone in your life. I see you, and I wish that I was a nicer and warmer-hearted person, but it appears that I am not. Next up, after that, I was like, I need to suffer. I need to prove that I can still feel emotions, because maybe Shark Heart has just broken me in some ineffable way if I'm unable to find tender-hearted and wholesome things to be tender-hearted and wholesome. So I picked up Just Mercy, which is a memoir. I feel like most of the memoirs in my life I keep inside of a metaphorical glass case, like break in case of emotional numbness, just to ruin your life for a little while. I love memoirs, but like, I know what they do to me. But this book was really something special. I gave it an extremely strong 5 stars. It's in that echelon of memoirs for me that just people who want to be good citizens of the planet, you should read this. Like, the world would be a better place if I could just download this into everybody's brain. This book is by Brian Stevenson, who is the founder of the Innocence Project, which is a nonprofit that provides entirely free legal advocacy work, mostly to convicted people on death row in southern states. They also do other things too. For example, they were the legal advocates behind the Supreme Court banning giving life sentences to minors who commit non-homicide crimes, which was previously a thing that happened. And that is definitely their work as well. Like, they do a lot generally within the justice system, but where it all started and the heart of the operation is still with death row advocacy. I am firmly anti-death penalty. I was before I read this book, and I am even more so after reading this book. And if you really don't have an opinion either way, or if you're pro death penalty, I seriously recommend considering giving this book a go, because I can't imagine reading this book and coming out of it thinking that it is a sane and moral thing to do, to give the government the right to kill people who are incarcerated, are no threat to the rest of society at that point. Like, even if on a personal karmic level you wish that that could happen to the most terrible violent offenders that you can come up with in your head, allowing a partisan government that kind of power is just a wild thing to do, and it creates so many problems and inequities within the process. And that's really what this book is about, just showing you an inside view of all of those problems. Brian started his nonprofit mostly out of Alabama, which is one of the worst states in the union for things like these. And yes, a lot of this book covers an innocent man who was wrongfully put on death row for many years and then eventually was exonerated. And by the way, when I say innocent, I obviously mean that he was innocent, but I also mean that reading the facts of this case, his alibi, the jury selection, the results of the trials, it will enrage you. Like, it's that ridiculous that he was ever convicted of this crime beyond a reasonable doubt. So yes, this book is about innocent people who are still on death row and who sometimes die, but it's also about not innocent people who are on death row. It's about the extreme racial inequity in how these crimes are sentenced. Like, why are all of the white perpetrators of this crime in Alabama given life without parole, but the black people are given the death penalty for the same crimes, even when the families of the victims specifically request that not to be the case? You'll have cases in the South against black men where the DA will specifically move the trial to prosecute the case in a barely viable nearby wealthy white county, so that way they can reasonably select an all-white jury and then call that representative of the area against this black man. And all of this, jury selections, judges just resentencing jury recommendations to be even worse because that's what they can do, the complete bastardization of innocent until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, like, all of this not only happens in this country, it happens regularly. It is a level of political corruption that really demonstrates why the death penalty cannot possibly work in a fair way, just in a logistical sense, not to mention all of the moral problems I have with it. But I'm not just giving this book 5 stars because I thought it was based and good and valuable for those reasons. It's also just a really good book. It's impeccably researched, it's well paced, it's interesting all the way through. The author picks a lot of really good example cases that make you think in meaningful ways about the justice system. And also, just as a dude, like, as a guy, Brian is one of the best people that I've ever heard about or known to exist inside of this world. To dedicate your entire life to fighting for people that the rest of the world has already given up on completely for free, like, you're paid barely a living wage doing this work off of the back of donations to the nonprofit. He's really just doing this for compassion. Like, that is a level of transcendental kindness that you almost never see inside of the real world. And I don't know, I think that this is such an important book, and I wish that more people would read it. To an extent, I think it's a natural human feeling to want retribution for the bad things that happen in the world, but taking a step back and thinking about how to do that in a way that is fair and humane, thinking about why we need it, who does it help, who does it all really serve, like, that's extremely important work. And I think that this book just does such a good job of encouraging you to engage with those critical conversations. This also relates obviously to Notes on an Execution, which is another book I gave 5 stars this year. It is fiction, but it's about similar issues, so if you liked this book, I think you would also like that one, and vice versa. And no matter who you are, I honestly think that you should read both. Just really, really good. After, and I think also kind of during that, I read these 2 books for a vlog, and I'm not going to go into quite as much detail with these since I've already given you my full thoughts inside of that video. I would recommend it if you're curious. Also, it's just kind of funny, haha, pretty good. But the first book I read was The Will of the Many. This was great. I gave it 5 stars. I feel like if you're just watching this video, you would probably think that I was an easy rater, but it's been a long road up to this point this year. This is a Roman Empire inspired fantasy novel that follows this guy, Vis, who is the only remaining living member of a royal family whose land was conquered by the Roman Empire in this book, which is called the Hierarchy. And everybody who would care thinks that Vis also died, but the truth is he's still around, and he's just trying to keep his head down and live his life when he is given this incredible opportunity by a member of the ruling class to be adopted into this man's family and to attend this government academy where this guy is sure that there is something extremely suspicious that is going on. And even though he doesn't have any allegiance to this guy or to his branch of the government, Vis just kind of has to do it because his other options are worse. So after training to be strong and cool for a substantial portion of this book, he goes to this academy and he investigates the mysteries. He's trying not to get discovered for who he truly is, and he's also just trying to figure out what his plan is, because everybody seems to want to use him for something, and balancing all of those different ambitions with the semi-freedom that he is trying to get out of this is really, really difficult. The magic system in this book is best understood as just a pyramid scheme, but also more interesting than that, I swear. All of the commoners, the everyday people, are required to tithe a portion of their, like, spirit energy to somebody who is above them in the hierarchy, which makes those people more powerful, but they're also tithing a part of their amassed spirit power that they now have to the people above them. And when you are high enough on the pyramid to have enough will, you can do, like, kind of magical things. Like, you have telekinesis and you can imbue magical objects and stuff. So yeah, that's a very basic view of what's going on. I mean, it's a long book, like there's obviously more to it than that, but it's also sort of a familiar story. I didn't love this because I feel like it reinvented the wheel. It did not, at least in the first book of the series. I feel like the wheel is still firmly in place where it is and has always been. But the execution of this book, of that familiar story, was extremely entertaining. I just had a really good time when I was reading this. It's the kind of book that makes you feel like you could fight God. I think that thematically the series has a lot of potential that is not currently realized just in the first book, and I'm really, really looking forward to seeing where it goes. The sequel to this book might be like one of the first things I've ever read within a reasonable amount of time after release. Normally I'm like really bad about that, even for authors that I really love, but I need to know. I feel like the last 2 pages of this book fried my brain in such an interesting way. But yeah, I had a great time. This is like a raw enjoyment 5-star. But then after that, I picked up YN, which, you know, what is there to say that I haven't already said about this book? Really, everything that you could possibly need to know about this is inside of my other video, but this is about an adult woman in Germany who becomes obsessed with a K-pop idol, and then after that K-pop idol retires, she just goes on pilgrimage to South Korea to find him because he's kind of the only thing holding together her fragile existence on this planet. It is a weird book, which I do have the capability to enjoy, for the record, but this one, I gave it 2 stars, mostly because the writing was sometimes awesome, legitimately really incisive and compelling. I read some quotes during that video that I thought were fantastic. Like, this definitely had its moments, but also at the same time, this felt like the worst and most insufferable person that you've ever met in your entire life chose to do an MFA, and this is what they write. And I suspect that is part of the bit. Like, the main character was unlikable for sure on purpose, but the book was just so weird and yet also so hollow at the same time. It was both so true to the crazy shit that fans do to celebrities all of the time, and also so not so imaginary. It occupied this kind of weird uncanny valley for me, and I just couldn't get behind it. I wasn't a cool enough person to enjoy this book. My apologies. If you want all of the quotes and the fun excerpts of me just losing my will to live slowly while I'm reading this book, you can check out that video, but that's where I'm gonna stop with this one for now. Okay, moving past the vlog and into October, I read Forget Me Not by Julie Soto. This is a straight out of AO3 author. You can tell by the fact that Ali Hazelwood is the top blurb on the book. It's frequently a sign. She's kind of an AO3 girl's girl. And I mean, I'm an Ali Hazelwood apologist. I enjoy reading fanfic books or books by fanfic authors, especially when they're good. It just kind of makes me feel young again, unburdened by the weight of adulthood, back when my main problems in life were having only one friend and staying up too late reading fanfiction in my bed. A simpler time that can be awoken by the fanfic-esque. And I was told that this would be good by a few people that I trust online, and I thought it was fine. I gave it 3 stars. This book is about this wedding planner, Amma, who runs her own small business, but then unexpectedly gets this big influencer wedding, and their only condition for working with her is that they really want to work with this particular florist named Elliot, which would be completely fine, except that Elliot and Amma had had this tumultuous breakup a couple of years prior. So it is forced proximity, second chance romance. Both of them are grinders trying to plan this really cool wedding. I actually quite liked the B-plot of this book. I don't know, I like tasks. I like watching things get accomplished by creative people in creative ways. But the main relationship of this book, just second chance, is hard to get right, in my opinion. And my favorite romance book of all time is a second chance romance, so you can't say that I'm just being a hater with this, okay? But a lot of the time with second chance, I just end up feeling like the couple should never have gotten back together. And that was the case with this one. Without really getting into it, they were kind of just fundamentally incompatible right up until they very suddenly were not anymore. And the way that one of them just magically gets over all of their problems instantly at the end of this book, but at the same time couldn't even have a single conversation about it when they broke up multiple years prior, despite still thinking at that time that they were losing the love of their life. It doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, to make the book work at the end, you just rewrite a character entirely as if they'd been doing work on themselves this entire time, which they were obviously not doing. Like, you see that they're not doing that, but it's magically okay anyways. I don't know, it's really important in books like this to have a good reveal and recovery of why that breakup happened and why they're still a good match despite it. And because that was missing, and also because I didn't even really love the development of their relationship during the past sections when you were learning how they got together in the first place, I don't know, it's just, they kind of fell flat for me, which you can't do in a romance novel. Buying the romance is pretty central to enjoying the book, and I just kind of didn't with them. I liked, for the most part, how this was written. I do think that it has a very Hazelwood-esque flair to it. It's got the near first person, slightly cringy millennial humor, but also low-key, I kind of find it charming. And I would give this author another chance. I would read another book of hers, but this one was just not it for me. If you're in the market for a better book, in my opinion, with a similar protagonist to this one, I feel like Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez does the avoidantly securely attached people dynamic a lot better than this did. But yeah, I mean, it was fine. It had its moments. I feel like I've definitely read worse. Speaking of which, Flock. I read this for a video, obviously, recently. You've probably seen it if you're here. I feel like the people who watch my wrap-ups are just a smaller circle inside of the larger circle of people who like to watch me turn into the Joker reading new adult romance books. So you already know how I feel about these books. If you don't, just go check it out. Check out my new 2024 magnum opus. But yeah, I gave this 1.5 stars. Why did it get the extra half star? I don't know. I mean, you really have to leave room at the bottom of the barrel for the things that just truly break your spirit. And I still had gas in the tank after this to read the sequel, Exodus, which, spoilers for that video, I gave 3 stars because I low-key kind of had a good time. I actually think I liked the process of reading that book more than I enjoyed the process of reading either of the other 3-star books in this wrap-up. It's like the antithesis to how my scale normally works, because normally, again, 3 stars is fine. It's decent. It was forgettable, but it didn't have any massive problems. I can see why other people like it. But Exodus was the kind of 3-star where the problems were definitely in the room with us, and they were loud, they were chatty, they had a lot to say. And yet, the loudest voices of all were The Dark Call of Tobias King, the first dark romance man I have ever actually kind of liked, as well as the twin literal and metaphorical death rattles of the 2 love interests from the first book, who I hated. That was also pretty satisfying, just them being irrelevant after what I was put through in this. So yeah, that's all on those 2 books. You guys already know the rest of what I had to say on that, but moving on, Never Lie is next. This is a thriller that is about a woman named Trisha and her husband who are going to tour this house that they're contemplating buying, and it's a while away. It's in the middle of nowhere, like no houses for miles, and when they finally get there, they're just violently snowed in. There's a blizzard that happens, and I guess they never got the message that their real estate agent was canceling due to the storm, so they're just there alone inside of this empty house. And when they are forced to stay the night, Trisha discovers that the previous owner is a psychiatrist who had gone missing a few years ago, and the house is still furnished, like it's virtually untouched. All of her shit is still exactly where she left it, and Trisha ends up finding a hidden room that contains tapes of all of the sessions that she'd ever had with clients, and out of curiosity, she starts listening to them, and she pieces together that maybe the psychiatrist disappeared as a result of some foul play. Maybe Trisha herself is in danger right now in this dead woman's house in the middle of the woods, in the middle of a blizzard. Who's to say? It's all on the tapes. Hopefully she can listen to as many of them as she needs to stay safe. This was my second Frida McFadden book. She's written like a million at this point, and I do feel like I can say that I'm an expert now in her style. She writes these extremely pulpy, fast-paced, Lifetime movie style thrillers. The writing is always a pretty bare bones vessel for the plot, which is always outrageous. None of the characters are really that rootable, but things keep moving. Like, you keep turning the pages because you have to figure out how they're gonna get out of this one. And I feel like books like that have a purpose in my life. So even though I didn't like this one very much, I'm still giving it 2.5 stars. I feel like the reading experience of a Frida McFadden book is just cool water running over the plains of your smooth brain when you can't conceive of possibly consuming anything else. Like, it can be pretty entertaining for what it is. But the problem with her books is if you do start to accidentally have a thought when you're reading them, the entire thing kind of just falls apart. And I am going to speak about this book at this point with spoilers because I have to for my kind of negative review to make any sense, and also just for my own well-being. Like, I feel like I have to say all of this out loud to you. So this is your fair warning for that. If you intend to read this book, you should skip to the next section of this video. They're all marked, okay? Okay, great. The major twist of this book is that all along it was her, the main character, who killed the psychiatrist and who was involved with all of the shady shit that was happening at the estate. And it turns out that Trisha was not actually there to tour the house, but rather to find the body of the person that the psychiatrist had her help kill. Like, she knows the body is hidden somewhere and she's paranoid it could be traced back to her, so that's why she goes in the first place. She wants some time to find it, and she does. It was under the chaise lounge in a hidden compartment, just the perfect place to hide bodies inside of civilized society. But then her husband, who has been the obvious red herring the entire book, like, he's incredibly evil coded, but then was eventually proved innocent of the crimes. It turns out that he is still kind of evil anyways. He like killed his mom for his inheritance, and he's willing to accept Trisha's baggage that she has also killed people. So they live happily ever after. That's a wrap. And people on the Goodreads reviews for this book are like, wow, so insane. It's crazy. What a wild twist. And they're right. It is kind of crazy, but only because this particular kind of "it was me all along" character assassination plot twist is almost always so out of the blue and insane that it ends up just being bad. And the reason why it fails so spectacularly is that twists like this almost always result in the first section of the book before you know what's going on, just not making any sense in retrospect. Why is Trisha not just looking for the body that she's there to find this entire time? That's her one task. Why is she wasting hours of precious time listening to the tapes that she already largely knows the context of, rather than accomplishing her hot girl serial killer ambitions? Why are you pretending to find the psychiatrist's protagonist's ex-boyfriend suspicious. You know he didn't do it. I could give you other examples of books with this kind of twist that I also dislike, but I won't because I would be spoiling those books. But it's possible to pull this off. Like, there's a book I really like that does a twist that is kind of similar to this. Hot Girls Can Do It All monologue. It was made into a feature film that is also fantastic. I don't want to spoil it for anybody who hasn't seen or engaged with it, but hopefully if you have, you know what I'm talking about. That is an example of a character assassination plot twist that I feel is so well done, so well executed. Mostly because you look back on the first part of that movie and you're like, oh my god, so true. I should have seen it all along. And it's like convincing to you. I love a good unreliable narrator when the revealed unreliability makes sense within the context of the story. It just can't be the narrator or the book just hiding shit from you for no reason at all other than to give you a gotcha moment later on. And I do feel like that is harder to do in first person. Like in this book, in the name of not spoiling anything, Trisha's internal monologue in the first part of this book just makes her sound like this naive, demure, happy pregnant woman, which she is most definitely not. And it's not like you could just reread this and be like, it was obvious all along. Like, I mean, maybe if you squint, but no, dude, she was just recharacterized entirely for the benefit of a gotcha plot twist. And yeah, it's crazy, it's wild, but it also feels really cheap. Most protagonists could have just been secretly evil all along. You could do this with most stories, but should you? That's perhaps a better question. Anyways, yeah, that's why I wasn't the biggest fan of this. I also was told by people that this was her best book, and I definitely liked it less than The Housemaid. But on the bright side, for both of them, you could pound through these books in like half of a day if you wanted to. Will you gain anything of value? Is it purely the emptiest of calories? Yeah, maybe, but you could do it. You might have a good time. I don't know. It's starting to get dark, so I'm accepting my loss and just turning on a lamp. So my lighting's about to be kind of bad, but just hold my hand through it, okay? We all make sacrifices in life. Next up is Bunny, and I feel like I was better at synopsizing this book before I read it. I feel like I understand less now about how to communicate to you what this experience was like. This is about a girl named Samantha. She's in an MFA program, and the other 4 women inside of her MFA program are all really close and really weird friends. They just do weird shit and are rich and silly about it. That's their energy. They call each other Bunny. They have these ridiculous opinions about art and literature. They write like incredibly pretentious things, and they dislike Samantha all the way through the first year of the program until suddenly they no longer do. And in the fall of her second year, she is suddenly invited to their get-togethers, and that is about where we quit doing the synopsis. That is as far as I will go. Just know what follows is extremely bizarre. It goes in the direction that would class this book as horror, but you don't really feel scared when you're reading it. It's just kind of weird. I knew going into this that this was the kind of book that inspires some strong opinions. It was in my bottom 25 Goodreads ratings books that also gave us YN, so that's the company that this keeps, right? But unlike YN, which was pretentious to the point where it almost felt like a bit like high performance art, Bunny is a weird book that did it right, at least by my standards. I really liked it. I gave it 4 stars. It's the kind of book where when I was reading it, I was like, low-key, I could write a college essay on this. Like, I'm glad I don't have to. I'm glad that I'm free of that mortal coil, but I could. I feel like it inspires 5 paragraphs of analysis. And I think the best thing it does, and what really connected to me from this book, is it really drives home how complicated female friendships can be, especially when you want to befriend a group of people that have a lot of social capital. You want to be a part of something. You want to know what's going on at the top, and you pretend that it's completely your choice that you don't and that you're not included. But then when you finally have the opportunity to befriend them, no matter how much you have pretended to hate them, no matter how much you have pretended that you don't need a view from the top, you don't want the opulence of popularity, it can be so easy to forsake not only yourself by becoming somebody that you're not, but also your actual best friends, who are maybe less objectively cool, if that even exists, but they know you to a level that these new women will never. You can be to your bones yourself. You don't have to pretend around the people that have known you your entire life. But it's still really hard to see that when you get the opportunity to befriend people that you thought would never accept you, would never like you. I feel like everybody who isn't just automatically the cool one, I mean, some people are. Some people are just auto into these groups. Not me though. Surely most people at some point in their adolescence, as a teenager, as a young adult, have had that thought about what it would be like to be a part of whatever in-group exists inside of your life. It's like Mean Girls, right? Like, you learn eventually that loyalty to yourself and to other people sometimes means getting the opportunity to climb the social ladder and choosing not to, and continuing to choose the people who built you and who actually love you unconditionally and who were by your side even when you were nothing, instead of leaving them to run with this new crowd of people that you will always be pretending around. And yeah, I mean, back to Bunny, I feel like this book captures really, really well that particular push and pull with what society tells you to want out of your friendships, out of your life, with the people that you surround yourself with. And it's really good at it. I actually didn't notice this until I said it like 2 minutes ago, but in a vibe way, it really does kind of feel like consumer consuming Mean Girls for the first time if just everybody in that movie was like on acid all of the time and also kind of belonged in a mental institution. But at the same time, it also tells this tragically beautiful love story that I really did not see coming when I picked this up. But then when I did, from the very early chapters, I was like, am I the only person who sees this vibe? And no, I was not the only person who saw the vibe. The author also saw the vision. And I cried. I cried a lot at the end of this book, actually, which was definitely not on like my page 100 bingo card, but it was where we ended up. And I am aware, again, that all of this is so completely unhelpful and vague, but I'm really trying to give you the energy of this book without spoiling the journey, which is just, again, so fucking bizarre, but I also thought was really interesting. Nothing is explained, really. It's, again, just one of those lit fic books where you just have to accept that this is the way of the world. It's not high fantasy. What's happening inside of this book is not world building. It's a vessel for the emotional journey that you're seeing the protagonist go through. And I was able to accept that and enjoy the ride, but I can definitely see why other people would kind of struggle. And yeah, I mean, I think that this book is so popular at this point that it's suffering a little bit from audience bloat, because if you don't like weird books, if you're not down with the sickness, if you just want everything to kind of click into place for you at the end, this is not your girl. You will not have a good time with this book. I will say that I don't think it's as confusing as everybody on the internet had me believe that it would be. I think that people can sometimes misconstrue being extremely weird with being hard to follow, and I don't think that this book was hard to follow. Like, you can understand pretty easily the facts of what's going on the entire time, even if to engage with the themes you might have to kind of sit there for a little while to really like understand what's going on. But it is, again, really weird. Like, a lot of the components of this book are just there for the vibes and the vibes alone. But if you enjoyed Boy Parts by Eliza Clark, like 100% weird girl overlap with this book, in my opinion. They are kind of nothing alike, but also both books gave me identical feelings inside of my soul. I think that if you liked one, you're gonna like the other. If you liked that book, if you want to read something that is kind of like Heathers, if the Heathers were pretentious rich girly pops who were moonlighting as evil scientists, Aunt Martha was cool and alt, and JD did not exist at all, and the conflict in the story came from somewhere else entirely, and also everybody is on drugs all of the time. Like, it's kind of like that. So not really like Heathers at all, but also I kind of hope you see the vision. I enjoyed this quite a lot. Okay, the last book that I finished this month, I actually finished this morning. I have no notes for this. We're doing it raw. This is Bright Young Women. It's been on my TBR for like about a million years, but we finally got to it. Yes. And this book is a like mostly fictionalized retelling of the Ted Bundy murders. That sounds like an insane thing to say. I know that makes it sound like this book is so bad and unsavory, but just bear with me. And it follows Pamela in this book, different names in real life. I think that she's actually two people fused together. And Pamela was the key eyewitness that put him at the scene of the crimes that happened at the sorority house where one of her best friends was murdered. And the book is told partly from her point of view, following from when that crime happened to when the trial eventually occurs, when he's put away into prison. But also at the same time, you're flashing back to the story of Ruth, who is also fictional, and another one of Ted Bundy's victims from the abductions that happened, I think, in Washington. And you spend some time seeing her struggle with her sexuality, especially under the oppressive thumb of her mother. I mean, it's also the 70s, which is not a great time to be gay, but she kind of starts to come into herself, and she ends up meeting a woman who she eventually falls in love with, and who will go on to, after her disappearance, really like push investigators to connect the dots across multiple states in an effort to get justice for the woman that she loved. Again, this might not be super organized because I haven't had a massive amount of time to think about this book like I have every other book in this wrap up, but I enjoyed this overall. I think I'm giving it 4 stars, but I do have some complicated feelings. What this book is clearly trying to do, I think, is quite good and important in telling a story that is so obviously mirroring the legacy of one of the most iconic derogatory serial killers in American history. It's pretty clear to me that this was written in an attempt to give voice to the voiceless, right? To center the lives and the legacies of the brilliant women who had their lights snubbed out by somebody who was honestly just a murdery, greasy loser, and also somebody who was at the time, but still even to this day, like canonized as this genius serial killer, but in reality was just the beneficiary of like cataclysmically poor police work. It didn't feel as novel to me as I think it did for a lot of people who really love this book, but it was still really good. It was like shockingly well written as well. I don't think it's a thriller. It's shelved as a thriller in the bookstore, but it reads, I think, just more like contemporary or literary fiction. But anyways, as for my complicated feelings about this, again, I think this was good. I think it's important that we're telling stories from like these points of view, but you're still at the end of the day like retelling his story, even if it's from a different perspective. And sometimes I feel like the line between what was fictionalized and what was like true to life inside of this book was hazy in a way that made me feel a little bit weird. The vast majority of characters in this book, to my knowledge, are entirely fictionalized versions of real people, but they're given different names. Again, I think the main character is even a combination of two people, so she like super didn't exist. But then randomly you get to his last murder and the little girl, Kimberly Leach, has the same name inside of this book as she did in real life, which is just a choice I have complicated feelings about because I don't even think it's necessarily a bad one. You have a 12-year-old girl who tragically died. Maybe you've even talked to her family and they've expressed wanting to do something like this. You put her real name in the book so that more people know that she existed, that she was a person on this planet. But like, at that point, why just her? Should this have been a fictionalization, or should it have been like a pretty subversive true crime novel? I don't really know. Like, again, you're catching me like 5 hours after I finished this book. I haven't thought this all the way through, but I hope that you kind of understand where some of my complicated feelings are coming from, even though, again, I don't think that makes this book bad. If Netflix is gonna keep making all of the shitty fucking documentaries, I feel like the least that we can do is have books like this that both humanize the lives that were lost and, again, paint like greedy murder loser weasels as greedy murder loser weasels and not as like genius icons that they definitely were not then and certainly are not now with the benefit of hindsight. And yeah, I mean, especially during a year where I've consumed 2 justice system adjacent books that I've really enjoyed. Remember earlier in this wrap up when I talked about them, you were there for that. I think that regardless of my complicated feelings that have probably confused you at this point, just as they've confused me, either way, I didn't like this quite as much as I absolutely adored those other 2 books, but I still thought it was valuable as a project. And the writing was pretty good, the pacing was pretty good. Ruth's story in particular, the victim in Washington, was like unexpectedly tender in a way that was also obviously really tragic, but it was just missing like the chemical X that would have really made it feel novel and important to me. So that's why it gets 4 stars. It was really good. I would recommend it with the caveats that I've already shared for probably too long. This section is going to be a disaster, so my apologies. Now you're seeing what it's like when I don't write out my thoughts before I talk. But on that note, that is the last book. I'm free. Thank you very much for watching all the way up to this point. I really appreciate it. I have miles to go before I sleep. You have no idea what you're about to get as a gift. Hell or high water coming very soon. But yeah, if you like this video, please give it an actual like. Tell me the thoughts that you have in your head right now. Put them in the comments. And yeah, I'm gonna go edit this video. I'm probably gonna go edit this video. Okay, that's everything I have to say. Bye!